taking a moment to center your attention right on the crown of your head, feeling that warmth of God, and affirming to yourself, the Christ of God is quickened in me. The Christ of God is quickened in me. And then moving down the forehead to acknowledge that you are aware and conscious of the spiritual awakening. Affirm to yourself, I am aware of the Christ of God quickened in me. I acknowledge, I am aware that the Christ of God has quickened in me. And letting your attention rest there, affirming that the light of understanding and willingness enables me to clearly take right action. And knowing that, accepting that, I go into the silence to listen. Thanks, God. And as we bring our attention back into the room, we do so with gratitude. Thank you, God. Thank you for being with me. Thank you for taking care of me and walking with me through everything I do. We bring that back into this room as we celebrate together today. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. And amen.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debt as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever. Amen. Good morning. This is a song by Kelly Clarkson called Be Still. 2, 3. Far away from it all, you and me, with no one else around. A brand new start is all we need. It's all we need to mend these hearts. Back the beginning. Be still, let it go. Before we lost hope, when we still touched and love wasn't so hard, be still. I already know. Foolish one with a smile, you don't have to be brave. Every time we fall down, but we're falling from grace. Gladly climb your walls if you need me halfway. Slow it down. Why do we run? We're missing so much. Just be still with me for a while. Be still. We should have known. Foolish one with the fire, you don't have to be brave. I'd gladly climb your walls if you'll meet me halfway. Every time we fall down, but we're falling from grace. Here's my hand and my heart, it's yours to take. Be still. Thank you.
Be still, I think, can be the message every Sunday, really. It really is that answer. Just be still. Get in touch with God. Then whatever else you need, you're in a better shape. I love that the reminder that there is just one mind, that we're all one with God. Last week, I decided to be proactive, and so I sat down, I think it was Sunday evening, it could have been Monday, I lose track of time, and I wrote out my talk titles for all of September. And so next week we're gonna talk about the power of order. But on the 15th, the same day you're starting your class, the title of my talk is Not All Who Wander Are Lost. And it's about that transitioning process into the new. So I love it. Anyway, let's see. I was like, oh, those aren't my notes for this part. Here's those notes. There we go. Get them all together. So we are talking today about the gift, the power of divine will. And the talk is titled Matthew's Will because Matthew is the disciple that represents that. I seem to have this thing going where I prepare far in advance. I started taking notes on this because originally we were going to do this talk the 1st of August, but we shifted things. But on the drive here today, which is becoming a trend for me, it's nice that I have a long drive because it's just me and my thoughts and whatever music I turn on, which I almost 99% of the time turn on one of my gospel channels that I have set on Pandora. And today there was an Aretha Franklin song that says, God will take care of you. And that really is the answer, right? Like God will take care of you is kind of a definition of faith, right? And faith is the knowing, is the believing that God will take care of me in happy times and sad times and whatever is going on. God and I together have got this. I'm not alone, right? So that's faith. But will is the willingness to put that into action. And I got that today on the drive here. So I'm like, that's really, like getting that and like accepting that into your being so that you feel that, like that will is putting faith into action, and faith is trusting in God and knowing that God will take care of me. There is the answer. So we can have an early lunch today. Let's go home. No. So well, let's look further into it. Will is the directing power of your mind. It is the ability to choose, decide, command, lead, determine. That is your will. Now, that is will that can be used divinely or just freely, free will, right? And free will is not a bad thing, though it can sometimes be ego-driven, but free will was a gift of God, so you can't say, oh, that's bad. You know, it's not. It's fine. But we look at the other attributes that are given to our powers. And we know that the month of August is when we celebrate and study will. We know that Matthew is the disciple. Each of the powers are given a place on our body. And will is kind of right here in the center of our minds, right up in the forehead. And when I taught the 12 powers a while back, and there's a map in the 12 Powers of Man book that shows you where they all are. And suddenly, I saw a map to manifestation. And here is how that went. Our imagination, it's a three-step process. Our imagination lives right here between our eyes. They say the third eye. And that's the place where we're able to kind of go into that dreamland, right? And kind of see and experience things that are in the non-physical still, our ideas that we think would be neat to bring forward. And as we imagine, we kind of center in on certain ideas that we really give our attention and our energy to. And once we center in on those, then we pass it up the line, because understanding then lives right above that. And I describe that as, if, let's say, I want to build a new house, and so I kind of draw out plans on a piece of paper of my ideas of what this house would be laid out like, right? That's my imagination. Then I hand it off to an architect who gets a better understanding of what the measurements need to be and how it really needs to happen so that it is a sound structure, so that our ideas become sound and have a solid foundation to them, right? And then you pass it up the line to the final stage, which is the will. Are you willing to let it release out into the world, or will you shut it down? And so it's this kind of beautiful three-step process that Unity teaches us. Now, the other attribute is a color that's assigned. This is something that I really am interested in knowing why the colors have been assigned to each of the powers. And when I did a study a while back of like, well, I know that disciples are assigned to the powers, but why? And I started looking into that, and I read this book called 12 Ordinary Men, who's written by someone who is not a New Thought minister. It looks at it at a more traditional way. But as I read that, and the first time I read it and somebody suggested it, I put it down. I was like, that's too traditional. It makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to read it. And then I went back and read it, studying the powers. So when I read the chapter with Matthew in it, which incidentally, and it'll come up in a second again, that chapter puts Matthew and then James, son of Alphaeus, in one chapter together. But as I was reading that, I would move Matthew out of the way and put Will in and read it that way about this, so that I saw this, transition into becoming the power. So I was interested in that in the colors. And there's nothing really specifically written about that. So I waited until this week when I was preparing the talk to call Unity Village and ask, can someone tell me why each color has been assigned to the powers? And the man put me on hold, and then he came back and he said, there's one person that can help you with that. And she is on vacation this week. So, you should call back next week. He didn't even offer it. He said, I could take a message, but you should just call back. So I'm like, all right, cool. So I was at Starbucks. That's where I like to work a lot. It's a good white noise for me, whereas that same silence at home, if I get a white noise, it'll be a TV that I end up just watching instead of doing the work. So I hop on Google, and I'm like, let's just do a random search. Spiritual meaning silver, enter. And a lot of things that ignored the word spiritual came up. Here's the element, things about the element of silver and the metal. And then I saw this question that said, what's the difference between gray and silver? I was like, what is the difference? So I had to click on that button. So it said this. It said, gray is a matte shade or tone that doesn't reflect light. And bingo, I had a spiritual lesson, because what that's saying is that silver does reflect light. And silver, being our divine will, tells us that when we are willing to use it, that we reflect the light of God that is within us out into our life, our world, and our affairs. When we are willing to say yes and let it go, we reflect that light. That was a powerful lesson for me. Again, we can now go to lunch. No. So let's talk about Matthew. Really, the story of why Matthew represents will is very short. Here it is. Jesus walking down the road. He turns, he sees Matthew, the tax collector, although that's how it's in the book of Matthew. He calls himself Matthew. In Mark and Luke, it says Levi. He says, follow me. Levi, or Matthew, gets up and says, okay, and follows. That is the full thing, and we're going to delve into how that could possibly represent will. Well, Matthew, as we all know, was a tax collector. And as the others report, he was Levi, son of Alphaeus. I think that's really interesting, because James, son of Alphaeus. So it's like, wait a minute, were they brothers? So I looked into that, good old Google. And there are some scholars that believe that they were. And there are a lot of scholars that say, no, there were two Alphaeuses. And I'm like, that's cool. There's more than one of every name. I used to really think that my name was original enough. I was probably the only one. There might be other Wallys, although I've not met many of them. And I did one time, and it frankly made me uncomfortable. And because I'm used to being the only one in the room. But I'm like, Wally White, I got to be the only one of those. I'm totally not. If you search that on Facebook, there's a whole page. In fact, even in working in the entertainment industry, there's a website called IMDb, Internet Movie Database. I'm Wally White number 3 on that. I'm actually Wally White number 3 and number 5, but number 5 is a credit I don't want, so I've not corrected them. So anyway, maybe there were brothers. Even just the maybe of that I find interesting, because when we study our powers, they end up lining up together side by side, right? So it's like, and when you look into that order, which James, son of Alphaeus, represents, you can't really get to order unless you're willing to do it. Are you willing to stop and organize and put things in order, right? So they do work nicely together. But as a tax collector, Matthew was not really thought of very highly by the society around him, because first, he was considered a traitor by his people. He was a Jew who was working for the Roman Empire. He was collecting the goods and the money from his people and then passing it on. Only people feared a tax collector, really, in some ways that some people still fear tax collectors now. It's like, I want to keep as much of my money as possible. I don't want to give them too much. I don't want to fill this form out wrong and get somebody to come a knocking on the door, But that fear was there then too. But on top of that then, they were known for padding the books, right? So they gave Rome what was due to Rome, and then they put the rest of it in their pocket. They were thieves. And we know that night after Matthew followed Jesus, he hosted a dinner in his home for Jesus and the other disciples that were already assembled, and some of Matthew's friends, because some pharaohs pulled some disciples aside and said, why is your teacher, Jesus, dining with these tax collectors and thieves? To which Jesus heard and said, and I'm not going to give you the exact quote, but I'm going to give you the message behind it. I've come to show them the way. So I don't need to show people who already know the way. And he used the word sinners, right? I've come to show people who are missing the mark. That's what metaphysically our sinners are, people who are heading in one direction, but they're slightly veering off and getting lost and missing it. I've come to show them the way for their highest and best life, right? To show them where the goods are. Does a doctor just hang out with healthy people? How could he possibly help the sick if he didn't hang out with some of them? That's what Jesus was saying. So that's who Matthew was. That was Levi. Levi metaphysically is love in human consciousness form, right? So it's love, which is good, but it's not like divine love. It's that love that sometimes is like, oh my God, I love you, I need you, I need you so much, I love you, which is kind of an uncomfortable love to receive sometimes, right? So that's kind of who Levi was. And there are many stories in the Bible that tell us when people transitioned names. It happened a lot during those times because the meaning of the name was particularly important. So if there was a real shift in consciousness, a real growth that happened, the names would change. In Matthew's case, they don't tell us exactly why or when that happened or who said it. I think it happened in that moment when Matthew said, yes, I'll follow you. He shifted from this human consciousness, ego, sense-driven consciousness of things where he stole and he went for the material goods, and he put all that away and followed Jesus, the I Am. It's when our will that we have all the time